Welcome, welcome. Get settled in. We are going to. We'll have a few ways to get settled in. This afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are. First order of business is we need to see which of you are actual people. Get rid of the robot. Um, And Yannick, if you don't mind helping me admit people as we go through, as we're starting. And I'll just repeat this a few times. Those of you who have been at a Networks Festival space or a Fito space, Fito Network space, might be familiar with how we show up and how we play and how we engage. But for the next few minutes, I'll just kind of let us get settled in and repeat an invitation a few times over, which is just the main invitation is just like be who you are, be where you are. And what we want to invite you to do is unblur your backgrounds. Like, let's see if I can't see myself. Hang on a second. But there we go. So my background is like it's a complete utter mess, this room. Clothes everywhere. There's toys and kid stuff everywhere, cat stuff everywhere. So we want to see your realities as well. We want to see your smiling faces. Um, if you have, we even invite you, if you're in like a clean, very well cured space, we invite you to walk to another space. Show us like your messiest space. If you have bad hair or if you're eating and you're worried that like it doesn't look professional enough, we invite you to turn on your video. If you have cats or kids or turtles or whatever else around, bring them into this space. So um, just going to repeat this one or two more times as people come in, then we'll invite us to an opening exercise. The invitation is just to join as you are from where you are at this exact moment. If you're feeling, I don't know, if you're feeling kind of really chaotic, like bring in that chaos. That's perfectly fine. If you, I already said this, but for those of you who are coming, I feel like I often have to repeat this because my colleague Beverly always tells me that this is wrong. But she doesn't agree with me. But anyway, I'll say it anyway. If you have had bad hair day, turn on your video. We like to see bad hair. If you're eating, we want to see you eating. If you're outside, if you feel like going outside, if you're just like, you know what, I don't want to be on the screen anymore. I want to take a walk. That's also like go outside and enjoy yourself. I am very often, as some of you may know, doing laundry or cooking while on calls, which actually helps me listen and concentrate better. So that's a recognition of like be who you want to be in this space. Now that we have a bit of critical mass, I'm going to pop into the chat a little opening question. And this is a question that I love and I actually think is very relevant to today's topic. I'll repost this a few times as a few more people come in, but the invitation is just, yes, Michelle, if you have to do laundry, go do it. The invitation is as you're coming, okay, I'm going to repost this a few more times just as more people come in, but to think about the question and to answer in one or two sentences in chat about what when you were a child were you really curious about and how did that curiosity show up?
Listo.
So I'm gonna maybe say this one more time and then I'm just gonna let you enjoy the music from our festival playlist. Um, and let you type your answers and think about and read each other's answers. Thanks, Florian, for starting. So the question is, when you were a child, what were you endlessly curious about? And how did that curiosity show up? I'm going to type my answer as well, and I'll mute myself and leave us 3 or 4 minutes. Juan, I can't take credit for the song. This was co-created playlist last year, actually. And once you've typed, just go back and interact with others' responses. You can reply, you can react with emojis.
Que baja hermosa por su barrosa profundidad. Soy un paisano serio, soy gente del remanso Valerio, que es donde el cielo remonta vuelo en el Paraná. Tengo el color del río y su misma voz en mi canto sigo, el agua mansa y su suave danza en el corazón. Pero a veces oscura, va turbulenta en la ciega hondura y se hace
For those who are
brillo
just
este
entering,
cuchillo de
I'll
pescador.
share the prompt. We're just reflecting on what it is that made us endlessly curious as children.
Los espineles, déjanos tus dones. No pienses que nos perdiste, es que la pobreza nos pone tristes. La sangre tensa y uno no piensa más que en morir.
Okay, so one of the things we'll do a quick presentation into what the Fito the it's not the Fito Net Festival, it's the network stuff that Fito helps curate and host. We'll do a quick introduction in a moment to what this space is about. And then I will hand it over to Yannick, who will guide us through the space. But one of the things that's really important about every networks festival space is there's moments for relationships and connection building. And so I'm going to actually open a few breakout rooms for 5 minutes. That's going to go really fast. And the invitation is just for you to share out loud your response for 2 minutes to this question, and then to listen to the other responses. You'll get a note once 2 minutes have gone. They're random rooms, so you might meet somebody you know, but this is a question that no matter how well you know a person, you can always go deeper with it. So take this as a moment just to find something new about somebody, whether they're new or old to you, and to deepen a relationship. Then we'll come back and we'll get into this space. There's a few new people that just came on, so it might take a few minutes, a minute or two, to make sure everybody gets in a room. But most of you have one already, so. Again, the invitation is just to share. Sorry, if you just came on, the prompt, I'm going to repost it in chat one more time, to share for 2 minutes and listen for 2 minutes really fast about what were you endlessly curious about as a child. See you in 5 minutes. If there's anybody who can't join a room because you're joining from a space where you can't talk, please type in chat and I will figure out what to do with you. Those who are just joining, we're jumping into it. Actually, no, if you're just joining, so Alex, Allison, Michael, actually one of you I'm going to put into this room because this person's alone. This person is alone. If you're just joining, I'm just going to invite you to stay here and reflect on this question with us. And I see a few people might have decided not to join the rooms because they can't speak. That's fine. And that's fine, Emma. Don't worry. I just moved people around to make sure everybody has somebody in the room. So the rest of you, if you're here and you're just listening, that's perfectly fine. And if you just joined, I'm not going to put you in a breakout now because it's a bit late, but I'm going to invite you. So Allison and Michael, for example, invite you to share out loud just in this main space around the question of what is something that you were endlessly curious about as a child. Allison or Michael, would any of you like to share?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I guess just off the top of my head, I was always curious about the river. I work with river restoration now, but I was always drawn to the river. I spent a lot of time with my family there, and I was curious on how the river created, the space that we were in, and how the water kind of cut through the land. And so I was always sitting around thinking about that. So, and it showed up just by being, and we were constantly along the river growing up. So that's how it showed up.
I love that response. Michael, what about you?
Well, I recall for a certain period of my childhood that my mother said I was incessantly, why? So I would say anything that was not already explained, why? Um, yeah.
We still have 3 minutes, so the both of you it's just gonna be the two of you because I think Emma and Sarah just they're listening only today.
I'm curious
So
what
you can
prompted the
both
question.
go deeper or ask each other questions, talk to each other. Go ahead, Michael.
I said I'm curious what prompted the question.
I'm just gonna throw that back to you. What do you think?
Michael, I love that you said you were always asking why, and then you came back with, why did you ask this question? It's perfect.
That's true. I'm not gonna answer yet. I'm gonna answer when everybody comes back. So, but you can make guesses.
They won't know.
I was talking to my daughter the other day about intelligence because she's 9, so she was asking me, like, why are certain people smarter? It's a tough question. And from trying to draw from her recent experiences, I was seeing that I think some of it is genetics, but some of it is just what you're interested in. And if you're very interested in reading, then you read, and then your curiosity grows. And so it's always the people that are asking the most questions and wondering and pushing like their understanding of something. That's how your intelligence grows. And I hadn't really thought about it until she had asked me, and I think that curiosity in things is really what helps you understand the world, but then guides you on your pathway, which I think is fascinating to think about all the choices we made along our pathways and how they drove us to where we are today.
Hmm. Michael, why do you think you ask why so much? I also ask why a lot, and I notice it in my I have an 8-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I notice it in my 2-year-old. He asks why a lot as well. Why do you think?
I'll follow your example, and rather than answer your question directly, I'll do a. No, I was thinking about how there is a Character Institute, positive psychology, a fairly recent developed field in psychology, which used to look at what is wrong or what their pathologies. Started growing in a sense like through evaluation, what is strong, what is beautiful, what are the character strengths. And in that list, you're asked to, instead, when addressing situations, understand what are your character strengths and how to amplify them further in addressing life problems. And for me, love of learning was the top one. And so, whether it is to be curious about what is seemingly curious and pleasant, or whether it's to be curious about what I'm avoiding, putting attention on something allows one to understand it in new ways and come to be and adapt and evolve in response to it in new ways. So,
Love that. Okay. Good timing, Michael, on the dot. So as we're trickling back in a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Yannick to get us started on this the rest of our space. There's a few new people who joined. So if you are curious what's been happening. We were just reflecting on the question of curiosity as a child and what's something that made us endlessly curious. And Michael asked me, who was in the plenary space, why I asked that question as an opening for this space. And I want to ask somebody to answer that for me. Like there has to be somebody in 40 people who can answer that. Why, like, just unmute and go, because we don't have, I'm supposed to hand it over to Yannick right now. So otherwise I'm going to call on somebody randomly. So like, if you're feeling brave, unmute and say why you think today's session about regenerative impact with that question. 5, 4, 3. If I get to 0, I'm calling in somebody. Oh, who's that? Who is that? Go.
I don't know. Is it something about possibility, endless possibilities? I don't know. That's what that curiosity. I don't something like a link to the theme. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I don't know. There's probably like 40 answers. But I also like the question just because I think that like evaluation is really about like being endlessly curious and learning and growing. And I think what you're saying, Fatima, about also like seeing different possibilities, and I think that really relates to Yannick's brilliant idea about making it regenerative. So thanks for engaging with this, jumping right into some relationship building. I'm going to do a quick 30-second intro to what the Network Cecil is, just in case a few of you have never been here before, have not shared a space with us. The festival is a space for, this is our logo, slogan, not logo. It's really about playing and being different in a way together that feels joyful and political, and rethinking about how we make change while also, as Fatima, you were saying, reimagining together. And our principles, the way that we share spaces across all of FITO spaces, is about listening, is about storytelling, is about just experimenting and failing and being ourselves. And I think the first 15 minutes tried to create kind of the space for all of that. And this year we're doing something somewhat different, which is we're having these tracks. And your track right here, this is one of 3 events, the first of 3 around evaluating impact. And if you're interested in seeing the other ones that are about impact, you can go to the festival website and find all of them there. But I'm going to hand it now over to Yannick. I'm really excited to have him host this space. And I think all of you are going to leave very, very, what? I don't want to just say happy, very satisfied, let's say, with what Yannick brings. Over to you, Yannick.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I might pick up Brandon and maybe spontaneously to do a magic trick for us to also see how that plays out in the digital space. And it's wonderful to share that space with all of you, and reading what made you curious as a child. And sometimes I say, because working now in this evaluation and measurement space for 12 years, nobody grows up as a child and says, one day I want to be an evaluator, right? There's always something different that actually brings us into this position where we want to understand, how do we actually measure, evaluate impact, network impact, systemic change, etc. There is a curiosity, there is a passion that is underneath that, or that goes much beyond just wanting to prove something. And today's session, there will be input, and I'm going to share 2 frameworks, one could say, more specifically. So one is called regenerative evaluation, which is an emerging field or approach to evaluation. And the other one is a specific framework that we have developed, which is called Impact Garden. And then we also have the chance to go again into breakouts and have an open conversation. But before we do, I really wanted to take the opportunity to invite you into a more introspective or reflective exercise. Also thinking about the session's title, and I'm going to read it out, which is Evaluation that Restores Energy, Trust, and Possibility. And so I thought, maybe before we actually go into content and input, we take the chance to actually connect to ourselves, and maybe also an invitation to restore, renew something that's inside, or maybe also our relationship with the work and the topic why we're here today. So this will take, I guess, 6-7 minutes or so, the exercise, and then after we will transition into content, slides, and everything else that I have shared. So what I invite you to is to take a comfortable position. Probably you're seated, so maybe you want to just move around a little bit and find a comfortable place, ideally upright, so there is, you know, some tension or uprightness. I'll just mute. Good. So a certain posture of presence, while at the same time also being relaxed. And if you want to, you can close your eyes, but of course you don't have to. You can also just comfortably look, gaze in front of you. And I'll guide you to tune into 3 different moments. And the first one is a moment where you felt very connected to inwardly to yourself. So maybe something introspective. It could also be a walk that you have been on, something that you were reading, a moment where you felt a certain energy or something bubbling inside of you. Doesn't have to be excitement, can be excitement. So think about such a moment where you were by yourself, maybe in nature, maybe not. And just take a few breaths to connect again to that moment. And then notice any physical sensations that you can feel right now. How does this show up in your body? And maybe also images that come up, maybe also thoughts. So just notice what is all present in your awareness. And one more breath in. As we transition to the next moment. Maybe you want to take a quick note, but no need to. You can also just stay where you are, how you are. As we transition to a moment related to the work that you do. It can also be work in a broader sense. So tune in to think about a moment, ideally a recent moment, but it doesn't have to be, where you came alive in your work. Maybe you have to go back into the past a bit. And then again here, just taking a few breaths in and out, tuning into that moment. And again, paying attention to how does it feel to relive that moment? What are sensations, signals in your body? And also anything else. Visuals, thoughts. And again, let's take one or two more breaths in and out. As we transition to the third moment. Again, any quick notes, anything that helps you transition. And for the third moment, to think about something in a relational or social context. So it can be with friends, with family, something that you really felt or felt really coming to life or felt very present. Something you potentially like to have more of. And again, just take a couple of breaths to tune into that. And notice again, how does this show up in your body? What else is showing up? Images, ideas. And again, one or two more breaths. And then I invite you to just do one more step, just for a minute. And that is to choose one of these three moments, the one that was more introspective, the one that is work related, or the more relational, social moment. And just think, how would your life be different if you were to experience that more often? Of course, it doesn't have to be the exact same moment, but more how it made you feel. And then just tune in. How can this be more present in your life? And just take a few moments for yourself. You can just stay with that. You can just take some notes. And you feel ready, slowly but surely, to come with your presence again into our shared digital space here on Zoom. And before we move now into content and the theme of today's session, so if you want to, you can share in chat anything that came up for you. And I'll just repeat Brandon's question now. Why do you think we did this exercise in a session on measurement and evaluation? So any one of you, maybe one or two, would like to quickly share.
I think we need to connect to these things in ourselves so that we can help other people connect.
Evaluation and measurement is not necessarily like this quantitative thing. It can be very interior, things that we can't even see within somebody or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can jump into that. In the breakout session, I was with one of the participants and we were discussing how like evaluation a lot has been like a box ticking exercise. And I feel like a lot of what's been missing for evaluation to really have the change in organizations is really connecting with the individuals and understanding like it comes down to human-centered systems approach changes that are required. And these are often left out. You know, it's something like a quick exercise, we do it and that's it, and then nothing is done with that. But you really need to work with the individuals that are at the core of this process. And I feel like it's really connecting with them. And these reflections are exactly things that should come up in these exercises, and to see what is required for people to be motivated to change as well, you know, like to create that momentum for people to do things differently so that at the end you're implementing that change that came through with the findings. So I feel like it's like a great reflection for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of that is so true. So again, Brandon said it, there are probably 40 answers to this. And it also was an exercise basically in measurement. And so sometimes I like to say, so what we have here, which is not only our brains, it's also our bodies and the connected intelligence. It's one of the most sophisticated measuring devices in this universe. But it doesn't always work in a very linear, or one could also say mental way, right? There's much more signals that we pick up on every second than we actually think. Quite often they're just screened out. So it's this question, of course, in terms of what do we notice? What do we pay attention to? So it was an exercise in measurement and also something to connect to ourselves. As agreed, the work that we do is just so human and so relational. And before I finally go into slides, so what brought me to this work is, so as I said, so nobody really grows up and says, I want to be an evaluator. So I was passionate about systems change and just making a difference. And ended up working at Fairtrade International and was working for the monitoring, evaluation, and learning unit. And I didn't even know that this exists as a profession. So I just signed the contract and then realized, or in the same moment, basically, that I'm working for that unit. And I've been present with this question: when and how does evaluation actually support the work that we aspire to do and the systemic change that we actually want to create? Not only on the outside, but also just in the way how we want to relate. So the future we want to create, right? So it's different from the future right now. So when does evaluation support empathy and trust building? When does it support moving towards joint action? And when does it stand in the way of it? Because it is becoming a box ticking exercise, or maybe replicating existing power dynamics. So I have been present with this question for 10, 12 years. And then there was a workshop I co-hosted on collective impact with social entrepreneurs. And basically my job was to tell them, more or less, you should pool your resources, should think about your impact collectively, put it in the center, and then understand your contribution, which makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I was just looking into really, really exhausted eyes. Everybody, like people had told me stories of burnout from themselves and also of others. And I was there now telling or adding in a way like one additional layer to their responsibility and burden that they should carry as they go about changing the systems. And I mean, I did it, but it was painful for my body to facilitate that workshop, because I realized evaluation and how we think about impact has to be part of the solution. and it has to care for the ones who are bringing about this change. If it doesn't serve ourselves and of course the people we work with, then something just doesn't fit. So, and this has for me been this spark for regenerative evaluation. And now going into some slides here. So, and this question of how evaluation can actually restore energy, trust, and possibility. And I actually didn't choose the title, but I really like it. And I also like because it says restores, which basically says normally it doesn't. But now we have this invitation to actually rethink what it can do. And this is how I structured also the slides. So first, there is a bit of a more philosophical underpinning to this whole topic before we move into regenerative evaluation as an emerging approach. And then I'm also presenting one framework. So just a little bit of background. So I'm co-founder of a social enterprise called Unity Effect. And one of the things we do is regenerative measurement and evaluation. And essentially, what we deeply care about is creating the conditions in teams, organizations to have agency. And we work in different ways. So one of them also being a partner for systemic change. So sharing that, because if there is an opportunity coming up where you think this form of evaluation or impact measurement can be applied, of course, please let me know. So I alluded to that as a starting question, which has been present for me now for many years. How can the process of evaluation give more energy than it takes to the people we work with, the causes we care about, and to ourselves? And to go into the origin, so evaluation is a form of measurement. And measurement, the term, comes from the Sanskrit maya, which basically means illusion. It also means creative energy, or through me. So basically, through measurement, we create reality. We create what we perceive, and we create reality. So the question in that sense is how or what do we perceive and measure? And fundamentally, it's also an evolutionary function. So basically, I don't want to go too much now into, which is not my field, developmental biology, or just to highlight, Darwin did not coin the term survival of the fittest. He said survival of the fit, which basically means people, not people, those who adapt and learn and grow and are, I would say, attuned to their environment. So measurement evaluation is a form of sense making, a form of wayfinding. And there's also this as I like to bring this in basically in every presentation. So what is measurement? And we often then talk about indicators and indicators for measuring something. And I think it's important to say that basically every time there is something I want to measure, which can be, for example, about systems change or network impact. And then there is a representation that I can measure, that I do measure. And there's always these two sides to it, right? Something I can measure, some want to measure because it matters, and something I can measure. And of course, the idea is that they are closely aligned. However, what often happens is that we directly jump to the representation I can measure before actually really reflecting on, in that specific context, the community, the system we work with, what actually matters enough here in that context to be measured, to then think about how we measure it. And over the years, my experience has been that basically anything that matters enough can be measured. Again, there might not be a perfect 100% fit, but the invitation here, I think, really is to just step back and ask this question: what really matters? And now the question, of course, then is how. And so one way of looking at this is that there are 4 dimensions too. Now, if you already go a bit into this, the question of how to measure systemic change. So in order to actually do it, because, well, it isn't that simple in the end, just thinking about one metric, is to bring these 4 dimensions together, which is about the paradigm of fundamental principles that we bring to this work. It's about the frameworks and the design that we apply. And then it's about the methods, the approaches, etc. So before we can then also bring this together into stories and analyses. what I would like to speak to here is now the paradigm level. And again, connecting this to this question. So how can evaluation give more energy than it takes? And so the paradigm shift, I already shared briefly like where this idea came from. So that evaluation has to be part of the solution. And I definitely have not been the first one thinking about this. So when I started talking to people, I realized, some had written their PhDs already on this, like literally regenerative evaluation. So what we did was convening as a community of practice, and we have been in inquiry for 3 years now, centered around this question: how does it look like if we approach measurement evaluation from this deeply regenerative place? And around 2 months ago, we published a living paper, and the heart of it is, oops, that was the wrong link. Here we are. The heart of it is these principles. So consolidated basically, or trying to speak to what this actually is, regenerative evaluation, and came up with these 9 guiding principles, which again is not a checkbox or a list to tick off. It's really more an orientation. So I use this basically in a project just to tune in, like, either something specifically comes up, or I just look at it and think like, oh, which principle could I actually strengthen more? And looking at the session title here, I picked 3 principles, and I'll just quickly walk through also for you to get a sense what's behind that. So the first one is time is teacher, learn from the past to shape life-affirming futures, which of course speaks to this idea of possibility and what might be emerging, while acknowledging that a place, a community, every one of us has a history. So any point in time carries both a deep past and potential futures. This principle invites us to expand our temporal horizon beyond the rigid constraints of a project cycle. It challenges us to honor historical dynamics, including colonial or oppressive realities, while actively nurturing the narratives and scenarios that lead to life-affirming futures. And in the living paper, we specify for each of these some practices and also some shadow sides. So I'm just going to give you an example here. So practice work at the speed of trust. We recognize that systemic change requires longer timelines than fiscal years allow. We resist the urgency to artificial deadlines, allowing relationships and processes to unfold at the pace necessary for genuine connection. Shadow side, trauma dwelling, getting stuck in archaeology, so endlessly analyzing past harms without a container for healing or a bridge to future action, leaving the people in the system re-traumatized rather than informed. So this is just one of these principles that we bring into evaluation. The next one, unearth and amplify innate potential, which is to recognize that every living system already possesses the seeds of its own evolution. This principle rejects the deficit mindset that views programs or communities as problems to be fixed. Instead, it invites us to identify and activate the latent strengths, assets, and wisdom already present. It demands that evaluation becomes a generative act of reciprocity, ensuring that the process gives back to the participants by deepening their self-knowledge and agency. And here, a practice is focus on positive deviance. So actively looking for what is working, even in broken systems. We seek out the positive deviance, the places where life is breaking through despite the odds, and shine light on them so the rest of the system can learn from its own success. Shadow side, the burden of potential. Projecting a potential onto a community that they do not wish to embody, or pushing a system to evolve faster than it is ready to, violating the principle of respecting cyclical rhythms. And I'll just read out one more, which is center love as a force for transformation. And we even had a community session on this specific topic, which is why it also shows up here as a principle. And it's to recognize that at the root of all regeneration is the impulse to care for life. This principle breaks the taboo of the neutral professional and invites us to bring our full humanity into the room. It defines love not as sentimentality, but as a fierce commitment to the wholeness and flourishing of the systems we serve. It asks us to move from viewing evaluation as a transaction to viewing it as an act of deep care. Oh, getting some hearts in as reactions. Thank you. Example practice, so dissolve the professional armor, so refusing to reduce people to data points. We allow ourselves to be moved by what we witness, bridging the distance between the evaluator and subject. We recognize that we cannot heal a system we keep at arm's length. And the shadow side to that is boundary collapse. So becoming so emotionally enmeshed that we lose the clarity needed to be a helpful mirror, or taking on the trauma of the system without the resources to sustain ourselves, leading to burnout. So, and I imagine, you know, if we were, and I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying I'm doing this all the time, but imagine bringing this to evaluation with your teams, with yourself, how different it would look. And there are still metrics, there's still measurement happening because it's part of actually nurturing the people and the systems that we work with. So if you're interested, there's a community of practice. So just now more than 200 people, 39 countries, I think. And later I'll just post a link in chat where you can read up more, both on the living paper, which includes the principles, and also the community of practice, which is free of charge, no expectations. And here's some insight into just what people in the community are working on, so you can see, right? So it really brings together, I would say really mostly practitioners, partly also academics and evaluation experts, but mostly really practitioners working in evaluation from a variety of different fields, and like more than half people saying they work on cross-cutting or systemic transformation as such as a topic. With this, I would like to quickly, also looking at the time, because I would still want to have a bit of time for a quick survey, of course, and conversation. So just quickly presenting the impact garden, because then the question is like, these are the principles, right? But how do we actually put this into practice? And I personally like experimenting a lot with different evaluation frameworks, because what I was looking for is something that is able to speak to the complexity and like the interconnectedness of the work that we do, while at the same time also being simple. Because mostly what's out there is either a very linear causal logic, like input, output, outcome, impact, or it can get complex quite quickly in terms of understanding it, like causal loop diagrams and what have you. So, and this is our attempt here, which is the impact garden. So it's an evaluation framework, and soon it also became a tool for strategic planning and other purposes. And what it entails are 10 dimensions. So you can see, for example, resources here added in, or also like the external conditions specifically as dimensions within the framework. And then what it introduces is, first of all, the different metaphor or lens for which to look at your work, which is from a living systems perspective. And then as part of that, also every dimension has its own metaphor. So for example, long-term changes we describe as the seeds and spores. So which basically is something that travels, but we cannot anticipate where it travels and how it will actually unfold. We can think about it, we can create the conditions for it, we can empower the people, and then we apply this now to measurement and evaluation, should think about methods. So there is a track even, I think, on ripple effect mapping, for example, methods that actually understand how our work is unfolding. So in that sense, it invites a different kind of thinking about impact in a different language. And it also highlights the cyclical nature of the work. So really thinking in learning loops, which is the irrigation system. So that which brings water to everything. This is something that we have applied a couple of times. I have 2 case studies here, but looking at the time, I'll cut this a bit short, but maybe just this one very briefly. So it's a Boba Di Peo fellowship that I've seen at least one person from you being part of it here today. So it's a 10-month fellowship for network leaders on the African continent. And so we've applied the impact garden basically to develop a theory of change for the program, understanding what it is that the program wants to enable for participants, but then also more broadly in terms of introducing a different type of network leadership, right, which is very much relational. And what we also looked at is how within the program, certain aspects such as peer support or trust forming, among participants, and how can we actually understand if there are these loops so that peers are supporting one another in the process as we go about it. So again, there's much more online, and I will leave it here with slides. Let me quickly go to chat because I've prepared a Menti. So thought about a sessional measurement. So let's do some measurement. So I invite you in chat. There is a link. And I'll just get my full screen up before I start sharing my screen again. Which doesn't work. Let's do it anyways. So what I thought about doing is, because maybe before you go into the statements and start responding to those, if you think about the topic again, so evaluation that restores energy, trust, and possibility, I think one thing that is so essential is this ability of a individual, but then also as a system, to both perceive itself, find ways to strengthen itself, while at the same time being attuned to what's happening around it and being able to respond to that as well. So these questions speak a bit to this capacity in us, but also this capacity in our organizations and teams that we work in. And they are not meant by any means to be normative or and really more about sparking the curiosity in terms of, maybe what can I do differently? So with this, I leave you now to respond to these statements. I think most of you have responded, so I'll just show the responses. Adapt easily to new situations. Most of you are somewhere here, and notice how my body and mind are feeling as things are happening. So you see similar average, quite different distribution, and feel comfortable holding space for ambiguity and uncertain situations. And again, here, this is really just to look and just notice for yourself. As we move to the next one, which is quickly sharing, you can think back again about the exercise we did initially. So your own experience, what are your personal signals of possibility? So how do you actually notice that there is a possibility emerging or something feels right? Just read out a few things as they come in. Feeling vibrant, excitement, peace, feeling comfortable, smiling, laughing, joking. Feels fizzy with excitement. Strands are there, just have to pull them together. My body feels calm, connected to myself, people around me. Lots of excitement here. Energy of ego down, I like that. Feeling of alignment. Okay, and things are still coming in. Just thinking back about the slide, so what matters and how can we measure it? Maybe this can be something for you to take away. So this is something that matters. Gives you energy and probably also inspires the people around you. So how can you pay attention to that for yourself to have more of that? And with this, moving to the last slide. So if you're still typing, please hit send. And this is reflecting on how you measure in your work, if you currently do. So how you measure, adapt, and learn together. And again, some statements for you to respond to. And if it doesn't apply to your current context, maybe think back of a context team. Let's look at the results. It's working, we have the flexibility. So that seems to be quite present. We actively measure the quality of our collaboration and trust. So some of you do. And again, we focus here on the positive deviance. So if you are up here, feel invited to write in chat or share later how you do it. Our evaluation reporting practices actively restore energy to our team. And so here we can see, again, some of you are here, but maybe 10% or so. So definitely, if the session contributes to a slight shift here to the right, I'd be very happy. And our evaluation practices actively help us learn and discover new possibilities. So again, here, this is some of you, half of you, definitely here on this, the upper end. And with this, Brandon, I'll just quickly put you on spot to create, again, short breakouts. So we don't have so much time, unfortunately. So maybe you can do just 6 minutes in pairs, and to reflect where you feel tension between how your work, how you want your work and your network to work, and how it is required to measure. So this idea between the nature of your work and how you measure. So attention, and maybe also a small practice you could introduce to help evaluation restore energy and enable you to sense emerging possibilities. So maybe something, an insight from the session today, something that came up that you could do.
Thanks, Yannick. I'm opening the rooms. Maybe just we could quickly type. I'm just noticing there's a few people that are leaving the hour, so I want to leave it a second to see who drops off. And if you wouldn't mind typing the prompt into the chat, and then I'll leave everybody maybe 30 seconds to think about their responses, and then I'll open the rooms. Okay, ready to go. See you all in a bit. And again, if you can't speak, just stay back here and I'll mix people around a bit. Maybe just type in check. You're more of a listener today. I think, Emma, you can speak, right? Just double checking, because I might have left a few people alone. Emily, you're also hanging out here. Okay. Who else is alone? So, all right, looks like everybody has a pair.
Oh, welcome back. And now, basically, I have time for open conversation until Brandon does his closing magic. I have high expectations, Brandon, just saying. So, and just one thing I also just reflected on also in the breakout is I didn't talk so much about some of the practicalities in terms of how to actually apply this, how to work in contexts where, you know, there are power dynamics, funders, you know, who might be responsive or not so responsive to this kind of approach. And just really inviting you now to actually, you know, bring up these questions, these also tough questions or issues, to then actually see how this approach, what I presented, can actually be applied potentially in that context. Ankita, do you pronounce your name correctly, Ankita?
Yeah, it's like a very hyper-specific context, because I am just beginning a program where I've found that a lot of the colleagues don't have the confidence or the capability to tell stories. A lot of their work is public facing, and there's a lot of placemaking work that they do around building communities, new towns, things like that. And so in terms of this whole program has been built very specifically based on people and giving them the capability, confidence to be able to tell their stories of the work that they do. And so I was wondering how I would apply this framework to this program, where I'm trying to help people go on a journey of really understanding that they're actually experts in what they do, being proud of their craft, and being able to sort of tell that story confidently.
And I can start, and then basically anybody can also jump in, either in chat or out loud. So how I often look at this in terms of how to apply this. So the 9 principles, I use it more internally. Sometimes I share it with certain people, but not everybody. So, and more use this as a like internal, like my own stance I take to this evaluation. And then the question is, for me, one, how do you conceptualize the overall theory of change or evaluation framework of this program? So, which can then be about like the skills and the capacity, which are 2 separate things, right? So how to actually understand and measure this development. Is there a peer format also happening, right? So how do the people you work with support each other? How do you track that? And then also what is actually unfolding for them in their work? And one method we often use is, you know, most significant change or storytelling based methods to then also understand how that work is unfolding. So, I mean, this is just a quick, right? So quick response. And then, of course, there are, I guess, many, many nuances to this. But like it's the principles, and then it's the design that you take, and within that design, the specific methods. And then the other thing is always like, how do you actually communicate and relate? And this is what I pay a lot of attention to usually in projects. The language I use to actually, you know, reach out to people. How are invitations framed? How is data they share actually being shared back? Is there opportunities for coaching sessions, for example, or however you want to frame and do this, which are really centered around empowering. So yeah, I think these are some of the dimensions. I see Diane, you have your hand up. Sure, if it's specifically or something else.
Well, I want to lean into this question, and also the question I was asking in the breakout about when something generic, if you will, and I don't mean that in a negative way, like your regenerative evaluation framework is helpful, and when is something maybe more specific that's keyed to the particular situation that you're evaluating or using. So I don't know that there's an answer to that question, but one of the ways that I sort of lean into people not necessarily wanting to be engaged is to think about one of the frameworks in this collection that might apply. And when we were talking about collaboration earlier, I put in the collaboration spectrum as a framework that could just be useful to prompt people to talk about where the collaboration that they're doing fits, and is it at the end of compete, or is it coexist or collaborate? What does that actually look like? And so these are the things I'm pondering, is when can we do evaluation prompted by a framework that is selected specifically to the situation that we're evaluating. So no answers, just lots of questions.
Yeah. And so just one quick response here, because one of the collaborators also to the living paper, Katie Boone, she speaks about this shift from evaluation being place-based. So we recognize that there is a place, to actually being place-sourced, which recognizes both place as a participant, so saying there's a history, and then also listening first before actually choosing the evaluation design. And this is, I think, really important, evaluation design, but also the language we use. And quite often when we talk, so it's my experience, introducing ideas around systems change are probably more likely to succeed if they are not framed as systems change. Because it's a very abstract language that can also come across, in a very like, oh, now there's, in my case, this white young dude, right? And now talking or whatever. So basically, quite often I'm trying not to do it, and really focus on like the people and the language that they are using, and so what would actually serve in that specific context. So just to say, I fully echo and with what you shared. And I think it's good to really also have this question about specific designs and frameworks second, or use frameworks that help you actually connect with the people and places. Michael.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to offer a way of speaking about this. I'd like to offer a use case and see how you might speak about this approach. The use case is now in an agency that was eliminated under the guise of efficiency. And a few years before it was eliminated, there was within a particular region two perspectives on how to invest in projects, whether projects should produce outputs that can be, so you could call economic growth kind of projects that show more sales of shoes and oranges, or systemic capacity building, like investment in, on the other side of the spectrum, was things like education, childcare, health, that don't have those direct. And so there was this, what is the most useful return on investment for this work? And it's a lot easier to show at the end of a process outputs than things with long-term where you can talk to it, but where folks are like, don't just give me the chatter, show me how this ripples into effect in the world. And that's often where these evaluations compete with others to make a case for how these evaluations are more or less effective. Any thoughts on this?
My first thought was like, why not both at the same time? So education and something that is more output oriented, but I understand there's also a question of budget and policy and that. So, but generally, I would really approach it first from this question of what would actually strengthen that system and the people the most in that specific context. So, and which might be around economic empowerment, which might also be more about education. So in that sense, I can't tell. One thing though is that I think there can be relatively hard metrics also for education, for example, because I think sometimes there is this idea when, like there's economic growth, that's just, it's very clear, it's very tangible, black and white, it's measured. There are also ways to actually measure, for example, success of education, of community empowerment, of decentralized ownership. So some of these other topics which they are nuanced. I'm not saying it's easy, but just want to say that also for these fields, there are ways to actually report on direct outcomes. So that would be my, I guess, unsatisfactory response. And just one more thought here. I think also short-term outcomes or results are super important, right? And also for communities to actually engage and feel the value of doing something, or the people that we work with in general. So may this be in, you know, like economic growth or also education, but just this feeling that something is changing and we are moving somewhere, and to be able to actually enable that and measure that, I think is important.
Yannick, I just want to note, Laura wrote a question. Maybe we can answer Laura's and then allow Margaret to go. Laura wrote, are outputs ever useful in understanding systemic change?
I think they are in the, like,
I haven't been able to think of an example, so please let me know if you can think of one.
So outputs in conventional logic is, for example, how many people attended this workshop or this training and completed it, how many are female, male, and diverse, right? And then, so this is a classical output metric. I think we like to call it meaningful outputs or meaningful interactions, just to also nudge a bit in the sense of, is counting participants actually good? Probably it's informative, right? And we shouldn't skip it as a metric. We should just not rely too much on it. And this is, I think, more where we come from. So I think outputs are important. Just understanding what is immediately happening is important. But what's the underlying question there? Is it training uptake? Is it, or are people paid to be there and then they're just sitting there to cash in, right? So I think you want to understand what's actually underneath it. Or did you have something else with that question in mind?
No, I mean, it's systemic change we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Not whether a program fulfilled its targets. So I think the problem is that a lot of people who say they want systemic change, or at least system-wide within a particular system, don't understand what you would look at to evaluate that.
Absolutely.
It's not outputs.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree. So that's why I say I wouldn't ditch outputs, right? As a relevant dimension of an evaluation framework. It's just so important to go beyond it. Yeah, attending the training, how many people, and then how is capacity forming, how is this being applied over time? And, you know, these more outcomes, and can we track that? And how does this lead to actually change lives? How can we track that as well? So how can we understand if in a community there are actually like certain structures and patterns shifting? And I know the challenge is then, you know, this can then sometimes just feel like, oh gosh, how do we measure this? And this is now becoming a lot. So in my experience, this is often a negotiation. So it's not a black and white in the sense of we can't or we can introduce such a more holistic evaluation design. The question is more, how much can you do with certain stakeholders, right? And how much can you then maybe do for yourself, which I know it might be additional work, but it might also be part of just, you know, additional learning or trust building, etc. So just, and that's a bit like this wiggle room or negotiation room. So how much can you go beyond outputs officially, and how do you want to expand it for yourself? I see Margaret.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I think we're all circling around the same kind of question. I work in an environmental coalition, but environmental kind of more defined largely about community health and social determinants of health, and like that, the bigger picture of environment. And so the coalition is fairly large, and we do have metrics about measuring influence and power and relationships and those sort of things. But because we tend to work more upstream thinking about policy, we always get into this conflict or tension, I should say, of that we can demonstrate we have had more influence in certain environments as a coalition. We can influence that there's more relationships. We can we can show that that there has been change, more diversity included, like those kinds of things. But then the question always comes back to, well, what did you change because of it? And with policy work, as many people know, it's not just like you flip a switch and then all of a sudden now that's all just changed, right? Like it was a long-term battle. So there's a tension between the outputs that are like, well, okay, so we get that you have more people involved, they're more engaged, they're more educated, they're more connected, you have more influence, but what did that actually do? That's where I get stuck.
Yeah. And so maybe, Brandon, you have a better overview of the Networks Festival, but I think, for example, there's a track on ripple effect mapping. And here, I'm not an expert specifically in policy or also in these kinds of methods, but I think, so we try this with such methods, for example, most significant change, to really let people describe what is it actually that changed and how can they relate it back to the program, and to not shy away from using qualitative methods strategically, not only anecdotally, because it is possible to do it in a manageable way. So that would be a short response, but here, but specifically on that, I'm not an expert, and if anybody wants to jump in, please do. I also see Jenny.
I thought that was a really interesting question. There's sort of an approach that my team's been exploring. It's sort of it's called human learning systems. I don't know how familiar anyone is. If on the meeting I could share a link, but it's also sort of draws very much on complexity thinking and the idea that so the idea that it can be very difficult to track sort of things in that way, from an output to an outcome, and to kind of understand it and also to preempt it. And sometimes it's about, like, say you have a project and you're understanding what the engagement's like, or where is that project taking place. Some of the outcomes might just emerge over time and you might not know what they are beforehand. But also, if you ran that project in another town doing the same thing but just with a different group of people and also in a different time, those outcomes might look different. There might be some similarities but also some differences. And I think our team has found it quite helpful, because we've been really stuck for ages between that output and that outcome, and how what we're saying will happen often isn't what we see to be actually happening. But I just wanted to mention that, really. I work in sort of a policy area, but I can share the link if helpful. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Everything.
Yeah, thank you. And I've also seen the but how question, so I didn't follow chat fully, which I think links to that. So I'll just quickly speak to this, and then I'll hand it over to you, Brandon, for closing the session. So what we do, so we also have in the backend consolidated more than 2,000 items to specifically measure elements such as like capacities on different levels, like a capacity of an individual to learn, to engage with complexity, to form meaningful relationships, many more, and also on a team level. So and usually what we do is we develop these surveys and then also correlate that with more qualitative results, so like most significant change. And so in for our programs, we can actually understand what changed for people in their personal lives and also in their professional lives because of the program. And we can correlate it with the data that we have on these more inner shifts in terms of, for example, the capacity to engage with complexity. And for us as an organization, we, for example, we have developed a way to actually, using the Impact Garden, understand our organizational health and vitality in terms of how we relate, but also the quality of services that we do. And we do that every twice a year or so as a pulse check. So how are we actually living into the principles. So how are we relating to each other? And then we can observe, okay, here in that space, we are not that strong, or, so basically this is how we apply this to have an understanding of these relational, or one could also say softer sides, always linking it also to outcomes. We know how much revenue we have as an organization, how much, like partner organizations, newsletter opening rates, we know all of that, right? And so then we just basically correlate these different data sources. So this is just speaking a little bit about the how. Brandon, 3 minutes.
So we have 3 minutes left, and I put a prompt in chat. Everybody can start replying, but don't press enter yet. But I'm going to give us about 60 seconds. And then this is to give us a sense, I'll just pose it one more time, of what might happen beyond this space. And I want to go back to the, where is it? Hang on. To this slide around the tracks, which is noting that one of the things we really want to try and do this year is see things that are experimental emerge beyond the festival. And if we look beyond the festival, so there's a lot more sessions. You'll get an email with all of this stuff. There's also invitations beyond this, the space to beyond the festival itself, to engage in deeper learning and thinking around funding shifting and this experimentation space. So we could have more spaces like this to deepen. And I also want to just note that part of this is there will be an invitation, if you haven't already contributed, in the follow-up email with opportunities to contribute or to contribute more if you found value in the space. And this year, that money is going to support such experiments. So I also want to note that Yannick hosts a lot of spaces, and Yannick, maybe you can pop some into chat, some links that other people might want to share to deepen. But I feel like there are a lot of questions that were brought up where it's like we're starting to think. And I'm going to invite you to press enter now, even though we have a minute left, just because we want to start seeding what things might we want to emerge. What are some things that we could feel like could be like more learning, but also more trying things out together that really feel like we're not just showing up to spaces to talk, but we're really experimenting? What are some things, even if you could write, I see that there's a bunch that have come through already. We're going to save this chat and we're going to look at this together. And as you're typing or reading others, I just want to note one small thing is a big thanks to Yannick. Yannick is not only hosting this space, but lots of other spaces around this topic for a long time. And so, yeah, so we could give some, like, you can actually unmute and applause if you want, or give some emoji applauses, but it's a lot of gratitude to Yannick for all the time that he has put in, and with his colleagues as well. And a gratitude to all of you just for being here, for thinking, for showing up, for trying to do things differently, or wanting to do things differently, bringing your curiosities in. We are at time. And so the invitation, as many of you know by this point, for a festival space and any Vito space is to close with verbally. So we don't want you to leave, although a few people already did. We don't want you to leave without hearing your voices. So when you're ready to go, just unmute. You can say a word of thanks. You can say goodbye. It can be in any language. And a bunch of people might speak at the same time. That doesn't matter. Just like, don't leave before we hear your voice.
Regenerate.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dzięki, do zobaczenia.
Merci, au revoir.
Thank you.
谢谢，再见。
That was wonderful, Yannick.
Oh.
Yeah,
I'm just all like with this like case study question, because I jumped the case studies in the slides because of time. But I think
there's so much more that you can go into, and I think that that might be one of the experiments as well. I want to make sure that we save this chat for like possible experiments. But I don't know. I love your. It's the first time I've seen it. Like I've read it, but like sharing the space where you're explaining it, and I just love how you frame so much of it in the slides. Even the way that you like did the Mentimeter questions that are also like, or your introduction, like all of it is helping us kind of like understand and think about this in a different way. And although it opens up so many more questions,
Yeah.
which a space like this can't answer. I think it'll be really interesting to compare like what kind of questions may be worth going deeper into.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, I love the what I wrote down is the a few things I wrote down, but like that one of the first questions, like, does it matter enough? And the way like you can pull out some of the principles. I liked that as well. Like the principles are a lot, but pulling out some and just like reading 3, I think was actually really, really effective. And yeah, I found the Mentimeter very effective as well. So yeah, it was great.
Good to hear. So the Menti was just something I thought about yesterday. So it's the first time I did it in terms of the flow and embedding Menti. So oh, yeah, sure. And actually, and for me, I'm present with this question to which extent actually to bring in case studies. Maybe the next time I actually frame and say, like, we have been doing this for years. It's possible, but then suspend it also a bit. That's at least it's a question for me. If I suspend or leave out my need to be liked and that everybody says this was a great session, if I leave this aside for a bit, maybe it's actually good to let people a bit in this kind of tension in terms of like not presenting too many case studies in terms of this is how this is being done. So because I really want people to connect to this, like the deeper layers of this whole topic. So it's something I don't know. I'll take with me as a question.
Anyway, I have lots of ideas. Like we'll have to after the festival we'll get all together and see what we want to do. But I have, as usual, and I have had for years, but ideas of how like I think there's a lot in here that could like, I mean, there's some things that could be experiments and even like community-led experiments, but I think that there's a lot more potential. And it's just like, whether we could find something like 250 or 500 or $1 million just to kind of like spread this and design it and like, work on like the methods mosaic and like you're saying, like that, I think just like the principles and then the how it was co-created and then starting with the like the metaphor, like there's just a powerful starting point for all of that, and how to get it out there in a way that doesn't compete but that kind of like adds on to what's already existing in the field, which is a lot. There's a lot out there, but I think that there's and maybe it's about leveraging spaces like the social innovation space in particular, where there's probably more appetite and interest and curiosity for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, let's think about it. It's just a couple of very quick thoughts. For September, October, I'm planning a 3, maybe 4-part series with case studies, specifically for this, like applying regenerative principles to measurement and evaluation. So bringing some people that I'm already in contact with, maybe some others, right? And then there's just a series and we just have cases. So I'm currently also working on the case for funding for the community of practice. I've already been thinking, because I know the International Evaluation Academy space where it's about indigenous evaluation, they all also want to raise funds. And I was like, can we make this like combined case here, communities of practice or networks that are actually collaborating. And then, there is this maybe $500,000 grant or something in that direction that funds these different networks. And the last thing is the official spaces are picking up on this. So the evaluation societies, but now, I'm facilitating a climate academy of the climate funds from the United Nations, etc. So the multilaterals, because people know that they should do it differently. They don't know how, and there's power at play, etc. But just to say, like, that there is beneath the surface, there is something emerging. So if you could really think about, something that actually makes it more visible or allows us to resource this work 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of ideas about how to make it more visual, like more stories, more spaces for people to experiment that don't cost a lot of money, more like bringing it to more spaces, also making it kind of like, focusing even more in depth on like in a collaboration on like the language and the visuals and the metaphor and like the playfulness of like, like a website that allows you to kind of like find what you need, and AI tools, which a lot of either of which we've experimented about or have written about, because we have this proposal called that I wrote last year called the Loom, which is more of a concept of like being able to kind of like go find, like with AI assisted, find what might be useful for you at the moment, but then from that you also find communities that you can kind of learn and experiment with. And then but I think the biggest question is not how do we scale it, but who will fund that. And so most funders don't want to fund the field building stuff. And you might have some ideas, and there might be some in the social innovation space, but another like maybe somewhat easier thing that comes to mind, it's not so easy, but one thing that's been working for us lately is this Pando group of funders, where it's a group of funders who are like 15 funders who are really committed to thinking differently around ecosystem funding. If we find one or two funders who are really on board with this, and that part of the reason that worked is because we had a mid-year behind that concept. But we've set it up in a way that it's a group of funders who are really interested in learning, like they pay for it, not a lot, like 3,000 to 5,000, but it adds up enough to facilitate the space. But it's designed in a way where they are learning from each other, they are experimenting, but also rippling out to the field. And so it's like setting up an ambassadorship kind of model in the funding landscape. And I feel like what I've been thinking about lately is how to kind of like replicate that model with other concepts, which then can potentially allow us to see where is their appetite for deeper funding as well. That might be cool. And that I feel like this question of valuation, there's enough people there's lots of people who are asking the questions, but there's enough people who are maybe like far enough along that they would be interested in like, being a part of the space like that. Wouldn't be that hard. Probably between who and I know that we could probably find 10 or 15 funders, and then takes about 6 months to set up. So that would probably be looking towards January, but that would be probably a really effective and practical way of moving towards this broader vision of getting it out there. So let's sit on that. But that can be separate from all this experimental stuff. That can be like an actual collaboration, which would be cool. Okay. Cool. Enjoy your moving. When are you like out?
So we have until the end of July.
Okay.
Have everything transition, so there is a bit of time still, but you know how life is.
Yeah. I mean, 2 months. Are you gonna be like closer to, I don't know, family or friends or anybody?
Friends. We are actually further away from family, so family support was there, which was also a reason, but my mother-in-law also doesn't have the energy anymore so much to support. So that's why daycare starts, and we have friends and people here. So that's good.
We've been searching for a few years for like co-housing and shared living, and not too much success. We found a few, but there were various reasons that they didn't work out, or they weren't open. But also my mother-in-law is now getting quite sick, and so she needs a lot more care. And then but we're also looking at a house like 5 minutes from here, but